All right, guys, good morning. This is my third time trying to film this video because every time I film it, I ramble on too long. Um, so bear with me. My first video, you probably could tell, is pretty stiff. I'm still getting used to recording these and, talking to a camera. Um, but basically, in this video, I'm going to try to make this short. There's just a couple things I wanted to cover. And it's basically two questions. So, number one, how do I know what is true? And number two, what is evidence? So basically, the process of building kind of a foundation of knowledge and trying to understand what is true is basically an infinite process. And all that it is the process of forming better and better explanations of reality. Absolute truth exists, but we will never fully comprehend it. We will only over time form better and better explanations for what is and get closer and closer and closer to it, but never reach it. That's very similar to the kind of the idea of an infinite God. Um, if God exists and he's infinite, we will never fully comprehend him, but we could continue to learn more and more and more about this being that created everything, right? Supposing that's true. The second thing is what is evidence? What do you define as evidence, right? If you're creating these explanations for reality and trying to build this worldview out, which is kind of what my goal is, right, with this channel and for myself, what am I accepting as evidence? How am I defining evidence? Um, Basically, I would say evidence is two things. It's my own personal experience. I have to take that into account. That's kind of where you start. And then basically, right, the experience of other people. And so you might ask, well, okay, what about science? And I would just lump science into the category of the experience of others. It's basically their experience of documenting and recording whatever it is they're doing to form better and better explanations of reality. That is, in essence, what science is. Science is basically just testing hypotheses, and hypotheses are explanations for reality against each other. They're basically trying to test them, prove them wrong, see if they break. And so any explanation that is difficult to break, any explanation that is difficult to change, any explanation that you have for reality that when you modify it, it runs into other things. It runs up against other things we know to be true. That's a good explanation. An explanation that is easy to modify, like if you have a mythology, right, that explains how the world came into being, or why does the sun move across the sky, and you say, well, the sun moves across the sky because a chariot of fire pulls it across the sky. Well, anybody could change that explanation to suit whatever they wanted. It's a bad explanation. So I'm kind of getting away from what I wanted to talk about, but basically, evidence is at its core, it's my own personal experience or the experience of others. Um, when it comes to evidence, I want to say that obviously your identity, your bias, your personal um, your own ego shouldn't be involved in the examination of evidence or data, right? You got to consider all sides. That's easier said than done because we're human, um, but it plays a role. Now, the last thing I have to say is just that all evidence exists along a spectrum. So you have weak evidence and you have strong evidence. Strong evidence would be when you have more cases of a particular phenomena, when there's more witnesses to a particular event, more test subjects in an experiment, more studies done, right? The more data, the more things you have backing up an explanation, obviously, the more strength it holds, and that kind of plays into what I said earlier about good explanations are hard to vary. If you have an explanation and you try to change that explanation and it starts contradicting this mass body of other evidence that you have, well, that's a strong explanation for something. But if it's easy to change that explanation, um, then it doesn't really hold as much weight. Uh, However, the last thing I want to say is that just because there's one strong case of a particular phenomenon, um, and maybe there's only one, that one strong case shouldn't just be discarded. It's there for a reason, right? So, for example, 9/11 is a historical event. And if you're trying to form an explanation for what happened on that day, but you ignore Building 7, then, right, okay, so Building 7 was one building and it fell, but it was very significant. And you can't really form a good explanation of what happened on that day if you just ignore that, like the fact that that happened, right? You could take the Japan Airlines incident in the UFO phenomena, for example. If we had no evidence for UFOs, but the Japan Airlines incident still existed, you still have to take that historical event into account when you're trying to understand reality, despite it being just one incident, right? That's kind of like what I'm trying to say is that there are some historical events, there are some things that have happened in this world that we should not ignore just because they are rare events, if that makes sense. One last example could be like, if you're looking at the abduction phenomena, if all that we had within the abduction phenomena was the Barney and Betty Hill case, you still need to examine that case, right? And you can't just ignore it just because it's just one case. So that's all I really want to say in this video. Those are just some thoughts I have about kind of definitions, right? That I'm starting with. So I think in the next video I'm going to get into kind of some of the research I've done on after-death experiences and consciousness surviving death. I think that's the next place I'm going to start. So feel free to comment. Let me know what you think. Any recommendations or ideas or criticisms or anything, I welcome. This is totally open, and I'm happy you guys are here. Go ahead and subscribe, like the video, or dislike it if you don't like it, whatever you want to do. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.